He was a farmer. He was a dairy farmer. My grandfather, his father, bought a farm in 1935, and he had a dozen cows and some chickens and pigs, and he always had dogs. Um, and when the war started, my father didn't live on the farm back then. He lived in town. My grandfather ran the farm himself, and my father, he worked in a grocery store. And then he went in for his service in the Army. It was a 1-year service requirement back then. He would have been drafted, so he volunteered to go get it over with. And the month before he was supposed to get out, Pearl Harbor happened. So obviously at that point, anyone who was in was not going to get out until the war was over. I mean, he started out, when he went into the Army, he was a private. And midway through the war in 1943, he had done well enough at whatever was involved that they sent him to officer candidate school. And then he came out a second lieutenant and even first lieutenant, and then he made captain. And so he was a company commander of an infantry company, and they wanted experienced infantry company commanders. His unit was pinned down by a machine gun nest was on the ridge up above them, and they were supposed to advance past it, and they were getting chewed up, and it was concealed by trees and shrubs and stuff like that. And so he and one other guy, and my father was a lieutenant at the time. He could have ordered somebody else to do it. He was the executive officer of the company, but he didn't. He volunteered, and he went up himself, and he and the other guy took out the machine gun nest. That general, my father was 5'8". Actually, he was 5'7.5". And the general who awarded him the star was like 6'4" or something. So my father looked like he was a toy soldier, you know. But yeah, he got the Bronze Star for. So by the time the war ended, my grandfather was ready to retire, and my father and his brother took over operation of the farm to help out my grandfather. It wasn't what they had planned on doing, but that's kind of how they fell into it. He came home in early 46, and got married, had me in 48, my sister in 1950, and right then he was called back to active duty for the Korean War, which he very much did not want to go, because by then he was married with a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, but they didn't give him any choice. You know, I mean, he did have experience. You know, he was in Luzon in the Philippines and New Guinea, and he did have combat experience, and he had won the Bronze Star. You know, whether that was a factor in, them calling him back or not, I don't know. That's what they said it was anyway. They wanted experienced officers. But at the time, I was 2, 3, 4 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't even remember him. When he came back in 1953, I was 5. And I can still remember going to the airport to greet him. And he was this, I had seen pictures, but he was just this guy walking through the airport. I didn't know him. And my sister, who was 2 years younger, she was afraid of him. She, when he tried to pick her up, she started bawling. When I was growing up, there were around 60. Around 60. Those were the days, more of the days of the family farm. But back then they had around 60 milk cows, and at any given time, maybe 10 or 12 heifers, the younger ones that, were still basically teenagers, I guess. And they would replace the older ones as they retired. 4:15, he'd go do the morning milking. He'd come back about 9 o'clock for breakfast, but then go right back to the farm, because there was always other chores to do. There was always equipment that needed repairing, and in the good weather, there was plowing and disking and raking the fields and, hay to put in and all that stuff. So he'd wake up at 4:15, go for the morning milking, come back about 8:30 or 9, have breakfast, go back to the farm, work the morning, come back at noon and have lunch, and then take a nap for about a half an hour. And then go back to work and come home around 6 o'clock for supper, a shower, and at 7 o'clock he would go to the track, work there until 11, and then he would come home and go to sleep. It was horrendous. Yeah. But that was, the track was 6 days a week. The farm, of course, was 7 days a week, always. I mean, they worked Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. It didn't matter. Their birthdays, it had to be every day. The cows had to be milked twice a day, every day. The 20 years I was growing up, we had 2 vacations, one of 1 week and one of 5 days. And that was it, because it was just so hard to get away. My father had 5 siblings and my mother 6. And so then you add in spouses and their kids, and there were around 30 people in each family. And so we would get together, at least once a month with my father's family and at least once a month with my mother's. And if there were birthdays, which there were a lot of birthdays with that many people, or, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, all that stuff, there would be family stuff. So my uncle, his older brother who ran the farm with him, was 4 years older. And when my father was 63, the cows got some kind of infection, and for months they were trying to clean it up. They couldn't sell the milk because of whatever infection was in the cows, was in the herd, and they were passing it around. So as soon as it cleared up, and some of them, others would get it. It just was. I don't know all the details, but so they did battle with that for a couple months. And then my uncle said to my father, they were struggling with it one night at milking, and my uncle said, for 2 cents, I'd give all of this up and just quit. And my father reached in his pocket, and he had 2 pennies, and he pulled it out and handed it to my uncle, and he said, let's do it. And so they retired. They contacted an auctioneer, they sold off all the cows and the equipment, and they retired. And my father retired. He was 63 years old, and within 6 months, he had developed Parkinson's disease. So yeah, he after all of that, and it was partly, we all used to think that it's like after everything he's been through, he couldn't even have a few years of a, pleasant retirement. Instead he had 6 months, and then the Parkinson's. So it was, he had pretty hard luck life in a lot of ways. War was not glory for him. It was a duty. He felt like he had to do it for the country, for what was, the times back then. But it's an understatement to say that he got no pleasure from it. He didn't say much about it, hardly ever, but a few times that he talked, he was bitter about having lost all those years, and I think especially Korea. He had a lot of integrity. He was a guy. He sometimes got taken advantage of because he was so honest. He would never cheat anybody, so he wasn't looking for anybody to, pull a fast one on him. I talked this over with my wife and my sister before, sending the flags in, and we all 3 of us agreed that he would want to do it. He would want us to do it. I think he would consider it the right thing to do, because I know he would look at it and think, well, what if somebody in Japan had something of his? Would he want them to send it back to us? And he certainly would have. So he would have felt that's, reciprocal is the right thing to do.